I'm Karen Thomas and I work with Melbourne Water. I'm a regional agriculture and land care facilitator. Looking at a project today where we've been working with dung beetles. We've got lots of introduced species because obviously cattle and livestock have been introduced into Australia, and so we need to have dung beetles that are actually going to feed on the dung of those particular livestock. Many species have been introduced for more than 20, 30, 40 years. But we've still got gaps in lots of our areas where we've got seasonal gaps where the dung is still sitting in paddocks. And so we want to try and introduce species that are going to cover those gaps for us. Similar to feed gaps and that sort of thing, we've got dung beetle gaps. So we're looking at ways that we can rear them up really quickly. So we've got things like these nurseries here, and we're breeding them up in large numbers in the nurseries, which we can then release out into paddocks and share beetles with neighbouring landholders as well through the land care networks. We're trialling these across a number of sites. We've got sites up around the Macedon Ranges, we've got sites in the Upper Yarra, and we've got sites in the Western Port catchment, and then down here where we are today on the Mornington Peninsula.
Well, I went to the Peter Ronald's talk that was given last year. It was really interesting, and we went to the next land care planting we had. They said, oh, why don't we raise dung beetles in nursery beds? And I said, oh. So I sent a flyer out to everybody and said, who wants to do this? And so then we thought, well, we'll try different species. So we got Greg Dalton involved from South Australia, and he suggested 3 varieties, and so we went with those.
For over 25 years we've had the smaller summer active beetles established, which have been Taurus and Fulvus. But we're trialling in the beetle nurseries bison, which is a winter active beetle, which is established well in other areas, but we haven't got it here yet. And then the 2 spring active beetles, Bubalis and Vaca. And they're the relatively new ones to the whole of Australia.
The dung beetles bury the manure in the ground. They produce tunnels to do that, so that will help drainage, relieve some of the compacting of the soil.
Well, they're very active, and they love cow manure. I suppose for a start they eat it themselves, which they don't have any mouth parts, they just suck it in. And then they bury it into tunnels into the ground, and they lay eggs on that. And by burying it into the ground, you're taking nutrients into the soil. It's a carbon store in the soil, and it's also aeration for the soil.
It cuts the life cycle of flies and some parasites for cattle. Stops the runoff into drains and things, so I think it's a good thing all round.
I do know of some farms that have stopped putting fertiliser on once they've established the dung beetles, and they've kept the same production going through the dung beetles, recycling of the nutrients.
Because the beds that you buy are expensive, we thought, well, how can we make it cheaper? And Birdie's had these beds here on special, so we've all came up with a different concoction to put on the top of them. And we got the Warrigal's men's shed to make the smaller one, because we thought, well, we can put the offsprings or just a small group in that, and we can offer them to other people if they're interested.
The first thing we do to put down a nursery bed is cut the grass really short. Then the nursery bed can either sit on top, it can be buried into the soil a couple of inches. Once that's established, it's just a matter of putting in the manure in the bed and then putting the dung beetles around the manure, and they will quickly crawl into the manure for security. Then just cover it over. The main reason for these is to protect them from birds, foxes and anything else, and hopefully keep other species of dung beetles out of that bed.
To harvest them, you've got to put a tray in, put some sand in the bottom and put fresh manure on the top, and then they theoretically come into the fresh manure, and then you sieve them, the next day.
Well, we seem to have been very successful with the Bubis bison, and most of those nurseries have got Bubis bison in, so we're very optimistic that coming late spring we'll be able to release the beetles, and they will establish out in the pasture. The spring active beetles seem to be rather slow, and I think we'll at least be needing to keep them another year to have built the numbers up to be able to be released.
So we got 5 today, but I'm not sure really if they're F1s or whether they're just ones that were there. Who knows? You know, it's a learning process. We don't know. You know, it'd just be great that there wasn't clumps of manure everywhere and it was in the ground and helping the environment, stopping the runoff and putting the roots of your grasses down deeper.
Where to from here? We've obviously coming to the end of sort of 6 months. We set these up in 2021. We've certainly been monitoring some of the sites and looking at the vaca that are emerging as the next generation. They're now going to go into hibernation until the following winter, and then we'll get another indication of the numbers for them. And likewise, the bison will start emerging probably around May, and we'll start counting those and sort of see what numbers we're getting for those. And then they can release those into paddocks. They can withhold some back and set up another year of a nursery. They could share them with their neighbours so the neighbours could set up a nursery. So what we want to do is get the technique right. So once we know we've got it right, we know which beetles are going to do really well, we know what gaps we've got in different areas, then we can start to breed up the right beetles in the nurseries and know that we're going to get good results, and then we can start looking at that broader release across the landscape.
Dung beetles are just an added part, but there's all sorts of other insects and things that live on this farm, and yeah, it's fascinating. It's fascinating.